Another death on Alcatraz, my boss said, sliding the folder across his desk with 2 fingers as if it carried a smell. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight behind the words. Officially suicide, just like the last one, and the one before that. He leaned back, folded his hands, and studied me. It's your case now. My name is Samuel Carter. 38 years old, 10 years in the Bureau, before that 8 in the Corps. People call me stubborn, and they're right. I don't drink ghost stories, and I don't waste time chasing shadows. My record is built on clean arrests and solid evidence. But as I picked up that folder, I felt something shift in the air, a draft that didn't belong in that office. Strange how paper can weigh heavier than lead. The reports were thin, and what they did contain was worse. Inmates found in their cells with eyes open, jaws slack, throats showing no trauma but lungs filled with silence. Medical examiners signed off on suicide, though nothing matched the word. One guard testified he heard a man gasping though he was alone and solitary. Another claimed he smelled salt water in Block D where no open window exists. Every line that hinted at something unnatural had been neatly crossed out, as if red ink could strangle truth. I looked at my boss. You think someone's killing them? He shook his head once. I think it's something worse. You'll take the ferry tomorrow. Low profile. Get the truth. He tapped the folder. And don't share a word you can't back with your life. I carried the file through the city like contraband. In San Francisco, Alcatraz isn't a subject for jokes. It's a subject for lowered voices. I'd heard it before. Sailors claiming the island had bad bones. Bartenders whispering about prisoners who swore they saw things in the dark. Until that moment, I never paid attention. Now the whispers trailed me like echoes. At a diner on Folsom Street, a waitress set down my coffee, glanced at the folder, and asked, "You heading to the Rock?" I hadn't said a word about it. Her tone was flat, like she was naming a storm on the horizon. A fisherman at the counter, gray beard dripping salt, muttered, "Careful. Sometimes the air forgets who it belongs to out there." He didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. Back in my hotel, I laid the folder open on the desk. Between clipped reports, I found a copy of an old map, the paper smudged thin from too many hands. Someone had circled a cluster of tunnels beneath the prison. Next to it, in shaky pencil, a single word, "Listen." I stared at it until the letters seemed to bend on the page. Who had written it? Why hadn't it been removed like the rest? I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't have me. The radiator clicked like distant footsteps. My thoughts kept circling the map, the fisherman's warning, my boss's eyes. I'd been on operations in Beirut, Fallujah, cities where every street corner breathed threat, but this felt different. Not enemy fire, not urban rot, something older, heavier, patient. I told myself it was nerves, nothing more. But nerves don't make you hear whispers in an empty room. When the ferry horn blasted at dawn, I was already awake, tie knotted, sidearm checked twice. I told myself it was just a job, another line in a long file. Demons, curses, spirits, nonsense for ghost hunters, and cheap tabloids. I was an agent of the Bureau, not some fortune teller with a crystal ball. My work was cold facts, sworn testimony, bullet casings, fingerprints, and files. The sea was calm, the sky gray, and still I could not shake the feeling that I was traveling not to a prison, but to a stage already waiting for its next actor. The other passengers spoke of families, wages, and weather. I kept silent, eyes on the fog, forcing myself to believe this was nothing more than another file in another city. My duty was to dismiss rumors, not join them. That was the armor I wore. By the time we docked, I had convinced myself. I was here to disprove the whispers, to show that men, not shadows, killed themselves. Perhaps guards covered up negligence. Perhaps doctors rushed their work. Those were human errors, the kind I understood. The dead were dead, and the living were lying. That was all. Yet deep inside, a quieter voice insisted I was wrong. The warden met me at the dock. Tall, rigid, with the face of a man who had forgotten how to sleep. His uniform was pressed sharp, but his skin sagged, as though the island had been drinking him dry. He welcomed me without warmth, and as we shook hands, I felt the dampness of his palm. "You'll find nothing," he said in a tone that carried no challenge, only fatigue. These men chose their end. It was the way he spoke, like a man repeating lines he no longer believed, but had to recite to keep order from collapsing. He led me through cell block. Metal doors clanged. echoing like church bells in a hollow sanctuary. Prisoners stared with eyes too old for their faces. Guards saluted, but in their gazes I caught flickers of doubt. One averted his eyes when I asked about the last death. Another simply muttered, "It isn't the men you should fear," before a superior barked at him to move on. The smell of rust and disinfectant filled my lungs. The light buzzed with the sound of dying electricity, though the bulbs were new. Everything felt staged, and yet unstable, as if the walls themselves held their breath. I returned to my quarters determined to hold the line. I told myself I would not bend to stories of spirits or curses. I would root my work in the living, in paperwork, in testimony. But as the lights dimmed and the corridors fell silent, I realized my laughter had dried up. The rock did not care what I believed. It was waiting to show me more. Still, I clung to routine. I wrote notes, sharpened pencils, polished my weapon, folded my jacket with military precision. Small rituals of control in a place that wanted me to surrender it. I thought of leaving, of telling my boss the case was empty, but pride kept me chained. A Marine doesn't quit. An agent doesn't run. That was my creed. That was my armor. And yet armor is heavy when the enemy is air itself. But alone, in the dark, I admitted the truth. I was afraid. And fear, once spoken, cannot be buried again. The next morning I stepped through the gates of Alcatraz, as if crossing a line drawn in ash. From the outside, the prison looked like nothing more than concrete and steel. Yet the moment I entered, the air thickened, heavy with a silence that didn't belong to daylight. Every step echoed longer than it should have, as if the corridors were swallowing sound instead of reflecting it. The scent of rust and bleach clung to the air, sharp enough to sting my throat. I'd been in dozens of prisons before, but none carried that strange mixture of stillness and expectation, like a room holding its breath. The warden gave me a brief tour, his voice dry, his eyes avoiding corners. He pointed out the mess hall, the workshop, the exercise yard. All routine, all ordinary, until we reached the solitary wing. The steel door groaned like a wounded animal. Inside, the cells yawned open like tiny coffins standing on end. "This is where the last 3 died," he muttered. He didn't look at me when he spoke, as though the words themselves were dangerous to pronounce. The cells were empty now, but I felt a current move against my skin, like a draft without source. I ran my fingers along the walls. Cold, damp. My flashlight beam flickered, though the bulb was new. A guard shifted uncomfortably, his keys rattling. "Men hear things in here," he whispered. "Breathing when nobody's locked up. Doors slam though no one touches them." Another guard hushed him, but not before I caught the terror in his eyes. At lunch I sat with a few officers. They spoke in half sentences, words clipped short, as if they feared being overheard. One admitted that men sometimes refused to sleep, claiming a shadow leaned over their bunks. Another said a prisoner begged to be transferred anywhere else, even San Quentin, just to escape the silence that grew teeth at night. The officers laughed, but no one's smile reached their eyes. When the tour ended, I found myself alone in a lower corridor, stone walls sweating with damp. The sound of dripping water echoed with a rhythm that didn't feel natural. I followed it and came to a locked door. The paint was chipped, the hinges rusted, but I swore I heard something on the other side. A faint whisper, a word I couldn't catch. I pressed my ear closer, and the whisper stopped. That night, in my quarters, I spread the map again. The circled tunnels ran beneath the very wing I had just walked through. Sleep came in fragments. In the dark, I heard footsteps outside my door, slow and deliberate, though no shadow passed beneath the frame. I gripped my weapon, heart pounding. The steps faded, but a low hum lingered, vibrating through the walls like the bay itself was singing. By dawn, I knew the island was not just stone and steel. It was a threshold, and I had already crossed it. The first days on the island taught me that Alcatraz had its own rhythm. Morning roll call, mess hall clang, workshop drills, all the rituals of a prison. Yet beneath the routine, something else moved, something I could not name. My first task was to interview the guards. They were men hardened by years of routine, yet their voices faltered when the subject turned to the recent deaths. One officer described hearing chains rattle in an empty corridor. Another admitted he avoided the laundry block at night because the walls breathed down there. They laughed after such remarks, as if trying to bury the words, but their eyes betrayed them. Inside the cell blocks, the air was heavy, laced with the sour tang of mildew and sweat. When I passed solitary, I felt it again, that strange current brushing against my skin. A prisoner called to me through the bars, his voice sharp with panic. "Don't stay after lights out. It's not the dark you should fear, it's the silence." Before I could question him, a guard dragged him back, warning me not to listen. But the words clung to me. I examined the scene of the latest death. The cell was ordinary, cot, sink, bars, but the atmosphere was suffocating. My flashlight flickered, though its batteries were new. On the wall above the bunk, faint scratches marked the stone, as if fingers had clawed in desperation. The report said suicide by hanging, but there was no beam, no anchor point. I wrote notes, though each line felt thinner than the truth in front of me. That night, I walked the yard alone. The bay stretched black and endless, the city lights a faint shimmer beyond the fog. Yet even with San Francisco so near, the island felt cut off from the world. Somewhere behind me a door slammed, though no one was there. My hand went to my weapon out of instinct. I told myself it was wind, but the steel taste of fear was already on my tongue. I stood frozen until the sound died, realizing how easy it would be to believe in curses if I let myself. Sleep refused me again. I woke twice to the sound of footsteps pacing the hall outside my quarters. When I opened the door, the corridor was empty, the bulbs buzzing low. On my desk, the prison map lay open, though I had left it closed. The circled tunnels seemed darker now, as if the pencil mark had sunk into the paper overnight. On the second night, the same thing happened. Footsteps, silence, then the map left unfolded, its edges curling toward me like a hand. By dawn, I realized the island was testing me. Each day chipped at my reason, each night pressed harder. Alcatraz was not going to reveal its secrets easily. It would grind me down first, until I questioned not the prison, but myself. And the worst thought of all was that maybe that was its purpose, to make every man doubt what was real, until the silence itself swallowed him whole. The island finally spoke through a man. Not the warden, not the polished officers, but an old guard I found near the dock on the third evening. His name tag was faded, his uniform worn thin at the elbows. He smoked cheap cigarettes that left a bitter fog around him, and when I approached, he watched me with pale, restless eyes. "You're the bureau man," he said. It wasn't a question. He lit another match, though his cigarette was already burning, as if the ritual kept his hands from trembling. "You won't find murderers here. Not the kind you can arrest." I told him I was gathering facts, nothing more. He gave a short laugh that sounded like gravel in his throat. "Facts? That's what I wanted too, back when I started. Thought this place was just walls and men. But the walls here remember, and sometimes they answer back." He spoke of nights when cell doors slammed though no one touched them, of whispers echoing in the mess hall when the room was empty, of prisoners clawing at their own throats as if drowning in air. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Long before this was a prison, the tribes feared the island, called it a place where angry spirits gathered. They refused to set foot on it unless forced. Then the government built stone on top of stone, thinking bars could cage something older than memory. Fool's work." I asked why he stayed. His eyes shifted toward the water. "Some men can't leave. You'll see." His words carried no pride, only resignation, like a man already half buried in the ground. The cigarette burned down to his fingers, but he didn't flinch. He just dropped it and ground it into the dirt. "You'll hear them soon enough. The ones who died don't rest here. They breathe through the cracks, waiting for someone to notice." He pressed a scrap of paper into my palm. On it was a single line, written in an unsteady hand: "Do not listen at night." I wanted to dismiss him as a tired old man, broken by years of monotony. But as I walked back to my quarters, his words gnawed at me. That night the silence grew so sharp it seemed to cut the air, and I found myself staring at the map again. The circled tunnels lined up with the stories, with the warnings. Listen, do not listen. Contradictions that made no sense, yet carried the same weight. I tried to read my notes, to focus on procedure, but the paper blurred. The pipes in the walls groaned like something moving inside them, too steady to be chance. Each creak sounded like a syllable, each vibration like a name I couldn't make out. I reminded myself I was a rational man, trained to resist fear, but reason is thin armor when the dark begins to whisper. When the lights flickered and the pipes groaned like voices carried through stone, I felt the walls press closer. My training told me it was nothing. My instincts told me the island was teaching me its first lesson. Here, the difference between truth and madness is only a whisper away. The warning should have kept me away from the tunnels. Instead, it pulled me in. By the fourth night, the map felt less like paper and more like an order, its circled corridors burning in my mind. I told myself I needed evidence. Photographs, measurements, anything to prove or disprove the stories. Truth, stripped of rumor. But the truth rarely waits in daylight. I carried a flashlight, a notebook, and my sidearm. The guard on duty hesitated when I asked for the lower keys. Nothing down there but pipes, he muttered, but handed them over without meeting my eyes. His reluctance only sharpened my resolve. The entrance to the sublevel was a rusted steel hatch near the laundry block. It screamed when I forced it open, the sound ricocheting through the corridor like a warning siren. The air below rushed out thick and cold, damp with the stench of seawater and rust. I lowered myself into the dark. The tunnels were narrow, built of stone slick with condensation. Water dripped in steady rhythms, but never from the ceiling above me. Always from cracks at floor level, as if the bay itself was seeping in. My footsteps echoed too long, as though someone else were following a second behind. I turned the light, but the tunnel was empty. Farther in, the walls changed. I expected simple utility lines, but instead I found carvings faint beneath the slime, circles, jagged patterns, symbols I didn't recognize. Not prisoner graffiti, not initials or names. Older, deeper. My training told me they were meaningless scratches. My gut told me otherwise. At one junction, the light flickered and died. My heart lurched. I slapped the flashlight until it came back, beam quivering across wet stone. For a moment, I thought I saw faces in the walls, mouths open in silent screams. When I blinked, they were gone. Only the carvings remained, dripping. I pressed on, though every nerve told me to turn back. The air grew heavier, dense like a cellar before a storm. Breathing took effort, as though the atmosphere itself resented me. I stopped to steady my pulse and heard it, whispers. Not echo, not wind. Words, layered and low, speaking in a language I didn't know. They came from everywhere and nowhere at once, brushing my ears like invisible hands. I shouted into the dark, voice breaking, but the whispers only grew, merging into a hum that rattled my chest. My knees buckled before instinct forced me to fire a shot into the stone. The blast rang through the tunnels. The whispers stopped. Silence rushed back, thicker than before. When I climbed out, lungs burning, the guard who had given me the keys stared at me without speaking. His eyes fell to my trembling hand still clutching the pistol. I wanted to explain, to report pipes, carvings, sounds, but no words came. He simply nodded once, as if he already knew. That night I lay awake, replaying the whispers. Not words of men, not the voice of sanity. The descent had shown me what the old guard meant. The rock doesn't just hold prisoners. It feeds on them. And now it had tasted me. The warden insisted I spend a night in solitary. See for yourself, he said, his tone flat, as if daring me. Maybe he thought the experience would strip the mystery, prove the deaths were nothing but weakness. I agreed, not out of courage, but because refusal would have meant fear had already won. The cell was a box of concrete barely wide enough to stretch my arms. The door shut with a slam that shook dust from the ceiling. My flashlight, my notebook, even my watch, they took them all. We'll check at dawn, the guard muttered, locking the bolts. His footsteps retreated, and silence claimed the space. At first I told myself to breathe steady. For walls, a cot, nothing more. I counted seconds, built mental lists of facts, recited case files in my head. But time inside solitary is not measured by clocks. It is measured by how long you can keep yourself from listening. The first sound was faint, a breath that wasn't mine. Slow, ragged, pulling air through lungs that no longer existed. I sat up, pulse hammering, but the room was empty. The second sound was closer, nails dragging across stone just above my head. I pressed my palm to the wall. Cold, damp, alive with vibration. Then came the voices. Not whispers now, but layered tones, hundreds of them, speaking in a chorus I couldn't understand. The air thickened, pressing on my chest until I gasped like a drowning man. I dropped to my knees, clawing for breath. My vision blurred. the cell stretching wider, darker. Shapes moved in the corners, shadows with open mouths and no faces. I shouted, pounded on the door, but no one came. My own voice was swallowed as if the walls ate the sound. My body convulsed, every nerve sparking with terror, and then I saw them. Eyes. Dozens of them, staring from the cracks in the concrete, wet and unblinking. They closed and opened in rhythm with my heartbeat. The chorus swelled until it filled my skull. A single phrase broke through the noise, clear in a tongue I shouldn't have known, but did. You belong. The pressure vanished. Silence crashed back, heavier than before. I collapsed on the cot, soaked in sweat, throat raw. Hours passed, or minutes, I couldn't tell. When the door finally opened, the guard looked at me once and said nothing. He didn't have to. My trembling hands told the story. I walked out into daylight, but the light felt wrong, too thin to warm me. My legs shook as if I had run for miles, and every breath scraped my lungs raw. Even the gulls circling overhead seemed distant, their cries muffled like sounds from another world. The rock had shown me its heart, left its mark carved into mine, and chained me to it in ways I could not yet understand. And I knew, with the certainty of a man already condemned, that it wasn't finished. The island didn't let me rest after solitary. It followed me into waking hours. Every corridor echoed with a rhythm I couldn't ignore. Every silence seemed alive. I stopped trusting the lights, the locks, even my own breathing. The rock had shown me its hand, and now it waited for me to understand the rules of its game. I sought out the old guard again. I found him near the laundry, sitting alone with his cigarette smoke curling like incense. When I told him what I heard in solitary, his eyes narrowed, not with disbelief, but with recognition. "You've been marked," he said. "That's how it begins." His tone was almost pitying, like a man watching someone drown from the shore. I demanded answers. He spoke slowly, as if pulling words from a wound. "This place was never meant to hold men. The tribes called it a doorway, between here and the other side. The government thought stone and iron could seal it. But the island eats what's given to it. Fear, pain, blood. That's the bargain. It always was." He tapped his chest with a trembling finger. "You feel it already, don't you? The weight in your lungs, the silence that follows you. That's how it feeds." The pieces began to arrange themselves. The suicides weren't suicides. They were offerings, sacrifices disguised as despair. Men didn't kill themselves because they wanted death. They were claimed. The silence, the pressure in the lungs, the whispers that drove them to claw their own throats, they were symptoms of something feeding. And the guards, whether they admitted it or not, had learned to look away, because looking too closely meant sharing the same fate. That night, I returned to the tunnels, against all reason. The carvings I had seen earlier were clearer now, as if the stone itself wanted them revealed. Circles within circles, spirals that pulled the eye inward. In the center of one wall, I found a pattern carved deeper than the rest, a mouth. Wide, unending, swallowing. I traced it with my hand, and the stone pulsed faintly under my fingers, like skin over a heartbeat. My stomach lurched. I had touched something that should not move. I staggered back, while in my throat. The island wasn't cursed, it was alive. Not flesh, not spirit, but something older, using men as both prisoners and prey. The cells above weren't built at random. They were laid like teeth around the island's hidden jaw, a geometry designed not to contain men, but to focus their suffering. When I emerged, the sky was red with dawn. My hands shook as I wrote in my notebook, but the words refused to line up. How do you record something that shouldn't exist? I managed only one line before the pencil snapped. The rock is not a prison. It is a mouth. And as I stared at the broken lead, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. Once you understand what the island is, you stop being a visitor. You become part of its hunger. And I had already fed it. I decided to leave the island. That thought alone felt like betrayal, as if the walls could hear it. But after what I had seen in the tunnels, after the whispers in solitary, I knew the rock would either consume me or I would vanish into its silence like the others. My order said observe and report. I had observed enough. I packed quickly, hands unsteady as I stuffed my notes into the folder. When I reached the dock, the morning ferry was already waiting, its engines humming low. For a brief moment, I felt relief, steel, water, distance. The mainland only a short ride away. I showed my papers to the guard on duty. He glanced at them, then at me, and for a heartbeat I thought he would refuse. His eyes were heavy with something close to pity. Finally, he waved me through. I stepped onto the deck, gripping the rail as the boat pulled away. Fog closed in, and Alcatraz began to shrink behind me. I should have felt free, but the further we moved, the heavier my chest grew, as though the island had hooked something inside my lungs and was reeling me back. I tried to shake it off. Nerves. Trauma. But then the gulls overhead fell silent, and even the engines sounded muted, as if we were moving through thick wool. Halfway across the bay, the fog thickened to a wall. Shapes flickered inside it, tall, thin, shifting in rhythm with the boat. At first I thought they were tricks of the eyes, but the other passengers stiffened, their faces pale. No one spoke. The captain cursed under his breath, throttling the engine, but the boat slowed as if something dragged against it from below. I looked back. The island was gone, swallowed by fog, yet I felt its presence more than ever. A pressure filled my ears, the same chorus I had heard in solitary, muffled now but insistent. Words in a language older than stone, vibrating in my ribs. I clutched the rail, fighting for breath. For one terrifying instant, I thought the bay itself would split open and pull us under. Then, just as suddenly, the fog parted. The city appeared ahead, glittering faintly through the haze. Sound rushed back. Gulls crying, water slapping the hull, the engine roaring to life. The other passengers exhaled as one, as if waking from a nightmare they would never speak of. When we docked, I staggered onto the pier, my legs weak, my throat raw. The mainland should have felt safe, but safety was an illusion. Even with the island out of sight, I still felt its grip, the echo of its hunger gnawing inside me. The whispers had followed. That night in my hotel, I tried to write a report. I described the official version, statistics, interviews, the neat story of troubled men ending their lives. But the truth bled through in every line. I tore up the pages, started again and again. In the end, I wrote a single phrase at the bottom of the folder: case unresolved. Recommend closure. My hand shook so badly the letters sprawled like scratches. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The city outside hummed with normal life, streetcars, laughter, footsteps. But beneath it I heard the low hum, the breath of the rock, carried across the bay like a tide that never turns. Alcatraz hadn't released me. It had only let me run. And deep down I knew, sooner or later, it would call me back. I filed my report in Washington 3 days later. The folder sat on the conference table like a stone dropped in water, sending ripples through the room. My superiors leafed through the pages without expression, nodding at the sanitized details. Multiple suicides, inconsistent guard statements, structural issues that might have contributed to stress among inmates. All very neat. All very safe. Your conclusion? One of them asked. Unresolved, I said. My voice was steady, but my palms sweated against the polished wood. Recommend the facility be reviewed for closure. They exchanged glances, then scribbled notes. One man frowned. Another smirked as though I had overreacted. None of them asked what really happened. None of them wanted to hear that a prison could be alive, that the island itself was the executioner. When the meeting ended, I walked out into the city sunlight, but brightness no longer mattered. The warmth felt thin, filtered, as if the sun itself had lost interest in me. At night, I lay awake, hearing the hum through the walls of my hotel, a vibration so low it crawled into my chest. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the sound came from inside, not outside. I tried to drown it in noise, radios, conversations, footsteps in crowded streets. It didn't help. The hum always found a gap. In restaurants, in theaters, even in church. Especially in church. Once, during a sermon, the choir's voices bent mid-hymn, their harmony twisting into the same chorus I heard in solitary. I stood up and left before anyone noticed the sweat streaming down my face. The nightmares returned each night. Sometimes I was back in the cell, suffocating under unseen weight. Sometimes I was in the tunnels, tracing the spiral carvings until they pulled me into their center. But the worst dream was always the same. Standing on the ferry, fog closing in, the island gone, and yet knowing I was still aboard, circling endlessly, never reaching shore. I stopped sleeping. My reflection in the mirror grew thinner, eyes sunken, lips cracked. A doctor prescribed rest, but what rest can you take when the air itself waits to smother you? One evening, I walked the waterfront where the ferries dock. The smell of salt and diesel churned my stomach. The bay was calm, Alcatraz a dark silhouette beyond the haze. People strolled nearby, laughing, unaware. I stared at the rock until the sky turned black, and for a moment I swore I saw lights flicker across its surface, like eyes opening in unison. Watching, waiting. I know now that the island never releases anyone. It brands you, claims a part of you, and that part keeps listening. The suicides were not weakness, they were surrender. The men chose silence because silence was already inside them. I keep telling myself I'll never go back. But sometimes, in the small hours before dawn, I dream of the ferry horn calling across the bay. Low, mournful, irresistible. And when I wake, I find myself standing at the window, suitcase half-packed, as if answering a summons I no longer control. The rock is patient. It can wait a lifetime. And I fear that when it calls again, I will not refuse.